Hi, welcome into the second floor of the Duncan Student Center. You're watching Shamrock Sports. A wise man named Charlie Daniels once said that the devil went down to Georgia, and honestly, that's a pretty unfortunate turn of events for Notre Dame, who's going to need a lot of prayers on their side this weekend. Fortunately for the Irish, things boded pretty well in last week's 66-14 rout of New Mexico, which was the most points Notre Dame has scored in a home opener since 1932. Can they carry that forward into Georgia this week? That's a conversation that's going to take about 40 minutes. I'm Ellen Geyer alongside Paul Farrington and Caroline Pineda. Shamrock Sports starts right now.
Hello, I'm Father John Jenkins, President of the University of Notre Dame, and thank you for watching Shamrock Sports.
On 3rd and 8, drops back, the Irish bring 5. Thrown to the left, intercepted. Kyle Hamilton will go. Touchdown, Notre Dame. 1st and 10 from their own 42. They give to around the right side on the reverse. Running free. The 10, the 5. Touchdown, Notre Dame. Touchdown, Notre Dame. This is going to be a touchdown. Touchdown, Chris Fink. Touchdown, Notre Dame.
Hi, welcome back in. So pretty good start for the Irish last year with their home opener against New Mexico. Obviously, 66-14 win against the Lobos. What are our bird's eye view takeaways from that game?
Well, obviously, things started off a little slow, I think, Ellen,
Yep.
in that game. The Notre Dame offense came out. They didn't look as efficient as I was hoping. Ian Book, even though he did throw 5 touchdowns in the game, I didn't think he looked tremendous.
Yep.
I thought he played well enough to get the job done. But once the Irish offense got rolling, there was just nothing New Mexico could do about it.
I did like it. I think there are a lot of really positive takeaways from the game. I thought Book really showed up and showed out. I didn't like, though, the run game. And that, for me now, coming out of New Mexico, is the biggest question mark that Notre Dame has going into the rest of the season. That's the biggest thing that I want to see addressed. But as far as positive takeaways, I thought the receiving core looked pretty good. Book had a couple options, and I think he did a good job finding them.
I was happy with the way the receiving core looked, Caroline, but I actually thought that Ian Book, in terms of his deep throws, I didn't see many of them. Phil Jerkovich came in, and the first throw he had of the whole game, 40-yard pass, beautiful pass, better than any deep ball I've seen Book throw, possibly in his career at Notre Dame.
But I don't think we need the deep balls from Book. I think we need those 10 to 20-yard passes is really what he has improved on since last season, and I think we did see that. What really made the difference is the yards after by the receivers, and that's what I was impressed by. So if you looked at their longs in that game, they had 37 yards, 65 yards, 52, 59, and 54 from the top
Those are some
receivers.
impressive numbers.
Those are some pretty impressive long receptions for our receiving core there. So I think what was impressive about the receivers was what they did after and how they did with contact and how they did really kind of creating those plays for themselves. That, if they carry that into Georgia, I think gives us a fighting chance.
I was going to say, do you think that's sustainable?
I think not to that extent, but I think to a certain extent, yes.
some extent,
I think
yeah.
it'll be different because you're not going to, I mean, Georgia's defense is not New Mexico's defense
Yeah.
by any means,
Yeah.
but you still have the chance to see these receivers, see what they do against contact, see what they do downfield, and I think they really do have the chance to kind of make some things happen there on that front. I don't think we need the long bombs from Book, but I do think we need, some solid, 20-yard throws, and I think he showed that he can do that, even if he's not throwing all the way
Maybe
downfield.
some shallower things. And I would say 2 things with that. First, we're definitely not seeing the video game accuracy we saw from Book last year, but I think that's something that's it's kind of a growing pain. It's going to come as the season
Little rust.
progresses. Yeah, shake the rust off a little bit. 2, I would say I agree with you completely, Paul. I don't think we had that strong of a start. But the fact that we were able to get our legs under us, I think that bodes well, since it's kind of been the opposite in the past where we have a really strong start and then things kind of fall off in the 3rd quarter. I'd say we were pretty consistent going through the rest of the game.
I think the big thing is the second quarter, and that was the second quarter was the one that Notre Dame really impressed me in against New Mexico, and that's a good thing, because if you watch Clemson, against Texas A&M, it was kind of the same thing, a little bit of struggle in the first quarter, kind of, getting their bearings. Second quarter really did a much better job establishing themselves as the dominant team in that game. A lot of good teams are kind of like those second quarter teams. So if Notre Dame needs to kind of, take a little bit of time to get going, if Book doesn't come out and right away have some great opening drive, that's not necessarily the worst thing, as long as by half they can pick it up. And really that second quarter, I think, is the deciding quarter for
unless
Notre
you're playing Georgia.
Unless we're playing Georgia.
We'll get to that
need a
later.
strong first quarter.
We'll get
but
to that
I think
later.
even if Notre Dame doesn't start out and doesn't have a great first quarter against Georgia, if they can pick it up in the second quarter, I don't think that a mediocre first quarter spells doom for the Irish.
Yeah, and kind of in that vein, obviously Kyle Hamilton with that amazing pick 6 play really kind of gets the momentum going for Notre Dame. So speaking of that, Paul, why don't you start? What are our who's your favorite breakout player this season for Notre Dame?
So I really like Javon McKinley. I think he played tremendous in last week's game against New Mexico. You have to remember that this is a guy who started the season, and he was arrested this past winter. So a lot of people thought that he might not even be on the team.
Not return.
Yes, people thought he might not be on the team. Brian Kelly put his faith in him, said, you know what, this is the kid's first mistake. Let's give him another chance. He was a former 4-star recruit coming out of high school. He's a consensus 4-star All-American, comes to Notre Dame, breaks his leg his freshman year, misses his sophomore year. And last year, with Miles Boykin and Claypool and Fink, there just wasn't a spot for him in that lineup.
They were just too deep.
So you have to remember that this is a guy, a lot of the team, they're rooting for him. And if you take a look at the reaction players had to his touchdown, it was genuine. You know, it was a genuine reaction of just pure joy for the guy. And he's someone that Notre Dame needs this season, because with Boykin out, you need this big physical 6'2", 220-pound receiver, the guy you can throw the back shoulder fade to, a safety net for Ian Book. And I think Javon McKinley, this week, he has a chance to prove it and say it was not a fluke, it was not a one-time thing.
He can be that guy.
To be honest, we need him.
Yeah.
Right, well, not that there's anything wrong with your 4-star recruit, but I'm going to go to a 5-star recruit who's got a little bit of hype. Not a ton. Maybe you've heard the name Kyle Hamilton.
One-up Paul. That's like a kind of
Hey.
theme.
Paul likes to one-up me too. Paul,
It's kind of like witty banter.
Friendly competition. But I think this one, Kyle Hamilton, I mean, this is a guy that's gotten a ton of hype. This is not a name that is like new to the scene. Kyle Hamilton in the offseason, we've been talking about him a lot. Since fall camp, he's really been showing that he can be that guy for the Irish right away this season. The pick six, though, solidified that. Like, here we go, momentum swing. Getting Notre Dame going in that game with that defensive touchdown was huge. And now he kind of shows, like, you know, he has the instincts. And that's really, like, the impressive thing with him is just his ability to see the field and kind of be that guy. And we've talked about, like, this defensive quarterback. Do I think that can be a freshman? I don't know. We talked about that being Alohi Gilman, but I think to Kyle Hamilton's strengths, he can be one of those guys who later on in the season can really kind of show them on defense, like, this is what we need to do, this is what we need to see, and really kind of give that radar to the rest of the defense.
You can see the natural ability of Kyle Hamilton. It's something that you really can't find often in a freshman.
Yeah, you can't teach that. He just has that natural ability, and obviously he's done so much to really advance that, but he really just has, like, the natural eye for the game. It's impressive.
Well, I take your freshman and I raise you. Graduate student Asmar Bilal is actually my breakout player. This is a guy who's on the scout team his freshman year, manages to make his way up. He played in all 13 games last year, started 10 of those, but he kind of just started to develop that way last year, and he's just been insane so far this year. So he leads the team I think he leads the team in tackles. He definitely leads the linebackers. No, he leads the linebackers in tackles. He leads the team in unassisted tackles. This is a guy who's been extremely elite, and he's just got this poise and this leadership presence on the field that you wouldn't expect from a guy who didn't really get many minutes as a freshman. Definitely not. He didn't get any minutes as a freshman, not many as a sophomore or a junior. So for him to be able to step into this role, I think he's a really great asset. Trying to fill in for Drew Tranquil, like, those are very big shoes to fill. I think this is a guy that's really done that pretty well.
He's going to have to be great this week, too.
He's going to have to be great.
So are a lot of other guys.
Yeah. I think that's something we're going to keep coming back to a little bit.
A little bit. We might be talking about Georgia at some point, maybe.
Maybe.
I mean, there's a lot of things going on in college football this week, so we'll see.
But circling back to something you said at the beginning, Paul, which was Ian Book, 5 pass touchdowns. That's his personal record. Chase Claypool was the leading receiver, I think 5 receptions for 96 yards. What did you guys see from that duo? Can Chase Claypool be the next Miles Boykin? What did you like? What did you not like between the chemistry of those guys?
Yeah, well, I've talked a lot about Book and Boykin last year, and I think Book's biggest weakness was the fact that he really did pick a receiver and target him the whole game. Yeah. Which, when you're playing against a good defense, is a really easy thing to read and a really easy thing to learn how to defend as the game goes on. So that's when you kind of get yourself in situations that if you're playing a good team, by the end of the game, if they can read you like a book, that might not be the best thing.
So unfortunate.
I had to do it. But now you look at Book, and I think that Claypool kind of could be that guy. I think now my reason to be hesitant is that I don't want Claypool to be the next Boykin in terms of Book not really looking for anyone else.
Seeing that
because a couple of his interceptions last year was because he tried to force things to Boykin. Instead of seeing that, I don't know, maybe he had Fink open. You know, he had a couple different
some of the shallower routes,
yes,
like the
exactly.
pops, the ins,
but he kind of has that, like, vision to sometimes where he gets locked in on one guy, and if it starts rolling and the defense starts picking up on it, he doesn't really realize that you kind of got to start looking for other guys first. So I think, you know, it'll be a good thing if he can have that chemistry with Claypool. I think he does have that chemistry with Claypool, and I do want Claypool to be that #1 receiver for him. But with, like, you know, just the cautionary
The caveat
of Boykin and a couple of his interceptions last year.
And like you were saying, and how I said before, Javon McKinley, I said, is a guy who has to step up. And I think Chase Claypool has more pressure on him than anyone else on this offense, not named Ian Book, to play up to his potential. Because last year, coming into the season, everyone thought Chase Claypool was going to take over for EQ and become that #1 receiver. So once last year came along and Boykin basically stepped into that #1 role, I think a lot of people were disappointed in his performance. So last week, I was happy to see that chemistry form between Book and Claypool, where I haven't really seen that in the past. There's been flashes of it, but last week, I really saw for the first time both of them seeming to be on the same page.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I do think having options at the receiving core is going to be the biggest thing. So we look at, those top 5 receivers that had really, really good, long receptions, and now it's kind of going to be building on that and making sure that Book has a variety of targets that he can find and that he meshes well with, and that going into the rest of the season can continue to make things happen downfield and, have that combination of Book making good throws and them doing things after.
The thing is, Caroline, is that this season there is no Dexter Williams, there is no Miles
Exactly.
Boykin to bail you out if you're Notre Dame. Those are guys you could turn to because of their sheer athleticism. So Chase Claypool is the closest thing we have to either of those guys, and he's got to step up, or this is going to be a long season.
Yeah, well, I think we've talked a lot, Ellen, especially about the run game, and my hesitation there is when you look at those numbers, Book was our leading rusher didn't even break 50 yards. So none of the other guys broke 30, and that's kind of where you get to the point, like you mentioned, Dexter Williams and Miles Boykin. I think there's a much better chance for Claypool to step into the Boykin role than there is for Tony Jones to step into the Dexter role.
To be fair, he only had 6 carries last week.
But that's just kind of the nature of it. Is if you're going to blow out a team 66-14, and you don't have a rusher breaking 30 other than your quarterback, what's going on? You need guys who can do that. You need guys that can step up and do that. And we'll get to that later, but that's one of the guys that I'll mention in my draft later when we do that. So I just think that Notre Dame is going to need to use a lot of different weapons in that run game to try to maximize how much they can do on the ground, especially against good teams that are going to have the defense to come out and pressure Book well.
And I do think that there has been that absence of a guy like Dexter Williams, but I will say I have been impressed by Tony Jones Jr. because I think he used to be the guy who could only do the dives. I think he's become a lot more dynamic in the offseason. He's a little bit shiftier,
that's the word.
quicker on his feet. He can kind of do the jet sweeps, that sort of thing. Kind of get the ball for the longer carries. So that makes me feel optimistic. But I think he was our 5th leading rusher. Yeah. So my question to you: it seems like Ian Book has been using his legs a lot more. Do you see him as a dual-threat quarterback? Do you think? No. I don't think he should be our leading rusher, but what's your take?
He shouldn't be the leading rusher. And actually, that's something that I think Ian Book has to be careful about.
Yes.
Is because he's the most important guy to this Notre Dame team.
We can't afford to lose him.
Yeah, you're right. We can't afford to lose Ian Book. There were a lot of plays in the Louisville game where Book was lowering his shoulder. And I remember I was announcing that game. And every single time I'd say, I'd prefer to see Ian Book just go out of bounds here. So in terms of him being a dual-threat quarterback, no. He's good with his legs. He can run when he has to. But if we're going to beat Georgia, if we're going to beat Michigan, these teams that we have on our schedule, we're going to need Tony Jones Jr. to play like a running back, to play like a quick running back, because Jafar Armstrong, he's out for a long time.
Yeah. No, I completely agree, and it was interesting, actually, this week I was reading some of, the Atlanta media's takes on the Notre Dame-Georgia matchup, and I was kind of surprised to find that no one is really treating Notre Dame as big of an underdog as I expected, but the really kind of funny thing in one of the articles was that one of them said, Notre Dame quarterback Ian Book is a true dual-threat quarterback, and starts going on this whole description of how Book uses his legs and is truly that dual-threat guy for the Irish, and I was kind of reading it have you watched? Because if you look at the stats, sure, he broke 80 against Louisville and he put up 46 against New Mexico, but those games are kind of the exception to what you saw last year when he can scramble, like you said, Paul, if he needs to.
But Wimbush is
but he was never the Wimbush. Right,
Brandon
exactly.
Wimbush.
He was never that dual threat quarterback. And
Paul,
so
sorry to bring him up. I know you're mourning that loss.
So sad.
So
so I just think no, he's not a true dual threat quarterback. I don't want him to be, like you said, he needs his arm, and to have that kind of question mark there of how much can he run the rest of the season does make me a little nervous because I don't want to have to rely on that.
Yeah, and Caroline, going back to what you said earlier, I think Ian Book, to me, he just hasn't been spending enough time in the pocket. Targeting a single receiver and then not knowing what to do if he's not there, Ian Book should be waiting 3 or 4 seconds before he scrambles. Instead, we're seeing 1 or 2.
And you have the line to do it. That's my thing. It's if
exactly.
he didn't have the line, okay, different story. Do what you can. But he has a good O-line. They're returning 4 or 5 starters. And the center, Jarrett Patterson, freshman, looks good. So why is Book kind of trying to make all these things happen on his own when maybe he doesn't need to yet? And I think he can be more patient. And that's what I think it kind of is, Ellen. Good point. He gets impatient and he tries to do things, I think, too early. And that's a little bit of my hesitation now, going up against a good Georgia defense, obviously the best defense that Notre Dame has seen so far this season,
Right.
and probably will see all season. And is Book going to have the composure to handle it?
Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit later. But speaking of defense, I think our secondary is kind of one of our biggest assets this year for sure. I think we might have a little bit of an edge in that regard against Georgia. So what did you guys see from the secondary? Paul, what do you think that this is an accurate representation of what we're capable of? What are your thoughts there?
I'm taking the New Mexico game with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
You know, it's 3 interceptions in the first half.
It's New Mexico, yeah.
As you said, no, we do have a strong secondary. We probably have one of the top. We have a top 5 secondary in the
I
country.
agree, yeah.
And that starts on the edges with the corners. And I think our safety unit could be the best in college football.
They're
Like
quick.
you said,
I agree, yeah.
I know you love Kyle Hamilton. Then you have Alohi Gilman and Jalen Elliott. It's a senior-driven, but also the young freshman talent, the young sensation.
break abilities are
It's a
second
very
to
talented secondary. The problem with Georgia is that it's not Georgia's receivers you have to
Yeah.
worry about. It's more so the running
Everything
game.
else?
Yeah, everything else with Georgia. So the real issue here for me is that as great as our secondary is, the game's not going to rely on them.
Yeah, I know. I agree. Okay, so with that, let's get into what we're all waiting to talk about, which is the Georgia game. But before we go to that, we're going to send it down to Austin Rooney, who has a recap of what's going on in college football this week.
I'm Austin Rooney with a look inside Week 4 of college football. Let's start with the 8th-ranked Auburn Tigers, who visit the 17th-ranked Texas A&M Aggies this weekend. The line for this matchup favors the Texas A&M Aggies by 3.5 points. Texas A&M comes into this matchup with a 2-1 record, their lone loss coming against the #1 team in the country, the Clemson Tigers. Now, they've outscored their opponents at home this year by a score of 103-10, and will look to do more of the same against Auburn this weekend. Kellen Mond has a 65% completion percentage, 5 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He's going to play a big role if Texas A&M can get the upset at home. Auburn has been tested once this season, and it was all the way back in their season opener against the Oregon Ducks. The Tigers were able to defend home field advantage against the 11th-ranked Ducks in that game. Now, Auburn relies heavily on the rushing game. It's led by Jatarvius Whitlow. He will have to play a big role in this matchup against the Aggies. Now let's jump into a Big Ten matchup where the 11th-ranked Michigan Wolverines visit the Wisconsin Badgers. Michigan has struggled against weak opponents so far this season. They allowed 21 points against both Middle Tennessee and Army in home games. The question this week, how will they be able to play against a top 25 opponent on the road in the Wisconsin Badgers? Michigan's defense is going to have their work cut out for them. Jack Cohn, who has a 76.3% completion percentage, 5 touchdowns and no interceptions, leads the Badgers. Can he keep up the strong passing numbers against the Wolverine defense? Another tough test this week will be when the UCF Knights take on an ACC opponent in the Pittsburgh Panthers. UCF is coming off of a very strong week when they took down the Stanford Cardinal by a score of 45-27. UCF has relied upon freshman quarterback Dylan Gabriel, who has 9 touchdowns and no interceptions, along with a completion percentage near 60%. The rushing game has also been strong for the Knights, as Greg McRae has rushed for 258 yards and 3 touchdowns through their first 3 games. We'll have to see if UCF has enough firepower in their offense to get past Pittsburgh in the ACC. Now, the top 2 teams in the country, the Clemson Tigers and the Alabama Crimson Tide, nearly have bye weeks this week. The Clemson Tigers are favored in their matchup against Charlotte by 41.5 points, while the line favors Alabama by 38.5 in their matchup against Southern Miss. This has been your look into college football. Now back to you guys upstairs.
Thanks so much for that, Rooney. So speaking of one of those games that he touched on, you've got number 11 Michigan traveling to number 13 Wisconsin in a big Big Ten net matchup this week. Who you guys got in that game?
So I got Wisconsin. They've outscored opponents 110-0 this season.
Yeesh.
And Michigan, you know, there's a lot of pressure on them because what's been the big issue throughout this Jim Harbaugh era is that he hasn't been able to win big games. And if you take a look right here, 3.5-point underdogs, they haven't won. Michigan, I'm talking about Michigan has not won a road game against a top 15 opponent since Chad Henne and Mario Manningham beat Notre Dame in 2006. So it's been a long time since Michigan has gone into a ranked opposing team's building and won the game. I don't see it happening this week. Jonathan Taylor's too much for them.
Yeah.
I agree with you on this one. And I think Harbaugh's other struggle at Michigan has been how predictable his offense has been. So if you look at last year, in the 11 personnel package, they threw 66% of the time. In 12, 22, and 21, they ran 68% of the time. So this year they've kind of cut out the 21 and 22 packages and just solely gone to those 11 and 12 personnel packages and are throwing and running about 50% in both of those. So he's really trying to make it less predictable, since that was such an issue last year, because when you go up against good defenses and you basically hand them your playbook and say, like, you know, if we come out like this, we're doing this, and if we come out like this, we're doing that, it's really too easy to play against them. So despite those adjustments that they've been making, I don't think it's enough. I think Wisconsin is able to come in and really capitalize on Harbaugh's struggles at Michigan.
Caroline,
And
I think
Wisconsin wins this one.
I think that if Michigan loses this game, and this might be a little dramatic, but if Michigan
take?
loses
Do we
this
have a
game,
hot take?
a little
Give
hot
us your hot
take. If Michigan loses this game, I think that their season begins to spiral out of control because they still have Penn
Okay.
State, Notre Dame.
I mean,
And
I've
I
said
think
it before.
Harbaugh gets fired at the end of the year.
Oh,
that is a hot take.
Okay, I mean, I've said it before. I'll say it again. Michigan is overrated this year, as they are every year. So I'm going to take
With no
Wisconsin in this
bias
one,
whatsoever,
too.
considering that Ellen goes to Notre Dame and is from Ohio and is an Ohio State
Full
fan.
disclosure.
No
Full
bias
disclosure.
whatsoever against Michigan.
Me, biased,
Completely
never.
unbiased. She thinks Michigan is overrated.
Okay, you know who's not overrated, though? Number 3, Georgia. You guys, road trip to Athens. I mean, where do we even begin? The spread is currently 14.5. It was 10.5. It's gone up. Do we cover the spread?
I think it's close. I think we come in close, and when we get to our predictions later, I'll kind of touch on one thing that I think we'll see in that game that kind of keeps it around where the spread is. I do think that Notre Dame is going to stay in this a while. I don't think it's going to be this huge, like, first half discrepancy that we see. Yeah, but I don't think Notre Dame wins this one. I think Kirby Smart has built a program now, and we've talked about this before, that has the chance to ascend to Alabama-Clemson level. I think Georgia is the only other program in the country that has the chance this season to really get to where Alabama and Clemson
Move into
are.
that next
So with
tier.
Jake Fromm, yeah, you have way too many weapons. Kirby Smart is way too good of a coach with too many weapons this year to not really be just a dominant program. So I don't think Notre Dame really has a chance. Will we keep it close for a while? Yes. I do think Georgia will pull away at the end, though.
And to answer your question, Ellen, I think it's a fair spread. I
Yeah.
think it's a fair spread. I don't think anyone's complaining.
Yeah. Okay, so kind of looking at the schedule that Georgia's had so far, it's kind of like us, maybe a couple throwaway
Cupcake.
games. Yeah, so they were at Vanderbilt. That was 30-6 win versus Murray State, 63-17 versus Arkansas State. That was 55-0. So that's a total of 148-23 for those of you who can't do the quick mental math.
Right, no, because you just did the quick mental math.
Oh,
Right?
yeah,
That was
me,
all
mental
mental,
math,
in case
yeah.
you're wondering. Ellen completely did that right.
Those are very tough numbers to go up against, especially, I mean, Notre Dame had 2 good games, but they weren't putting up those kinds of numbers. So this is kind of their first test. This is Notre Dame's first test. Does that give anything in our favor?
See, so I've kind of said this whole week that I think if Georgia takes this lightly, Notre Dame has a chance to pull off the upset. The problem now is that Kirby Smart said this is probably Georgia's biggest regular season matchup, not in the SEC in program history. So clearly Georgia is not taking this matchup lightly. So I do think kind of the only way that Notre Dame really had a good chance to come in and upset Georgia was if Georgia was kind of overlooking them and looking to some of those ranked opponents later on in the season that they might see as more like formidable foes since they're in the SEC. That's not happening. So because of that, I think it's going to be tough. It's tough to go on the road, especially somewhere like Georgia. Notre Dame travels well, but Georgia packs their house, and they packed our house 2 years ago. And that's something I want to touch on, too, is that a lot of people are comparing this game to that one 2 years ago and saying, what's so different? Is Notre Dame so much worse, or is Georgia so much better that, that close game can be replicated? And I think yes. I think the answer is yes, because now Jake Fromm has really established himself as one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Kirby Smart has built up his program. I think it's going to be a lot bigger of a margin than it was 2 years ago.
Well, you mentioned the game 2 years ago, and that's something that I find really interesting about this game is even though Ian Book was not playing quarterback for Notre Dame, you have a different backfield for Georgia, it still has that feeling of a rematch game. And I think that that's the approach the media has taken as well, that this is Notre Dame's chance to get back at Georgia. When you look back at the game 2 years ago, it really didn't have much implication on the season for Notre Dame. That ended in Miami, as we all remember. But it has that feeling of a rematch game, and it's kind of cool to see that, where Notre Dame doesn't really have rivals, but it feels a little bit like a rivalry game out of
Another
nowhere.
one, yeah.
And just to mention your point, if Georgia were to take Notre Dame lightly, it would be foolish, and I don't think they are. They expanded their stadium. It's the record attendance for Georgia this year. And just a little insider information, just in case if you want some. Just if you want some. So Notre Dame has 8,000 tickets for this game. The Notre Dame fan base was allotted 8,000 tickets. The marketing department for Notre Dame received 25,000 ticket requests for this game. So I'm not saying that we go into Georgia and fill up 30% of the
agree.
stadium like last year, like 2 years ago here. But I'm just saying there might be more Notre Dame fans than you think.
Yeah, than we anticipate. And kind of getting back to that game and what a matchup it could be, I will say what makes me nervous is that Jake Fromm comes to South Bend as a freshman and pulls off that win, the 1-point nail-biter win. So now that he's a more developed quarterback, and then obviously you have to add in DeAndre Swift, who to me is an NFL-ready caliber running back. I mean, the two of them together is just, honestly, I think one of the most, if not the most elite offense that we're seeing in college football this year. So how does Notre Dame address that duo when you have two guys like that you're going against? I mean, what's your play call there?
It comes down to the linebackers for Notre Dame.
Yeah.
You have Drew White. You have your guy, Asmar
Asmar.
Bilal. I always have trouble pronouncing his name. And then you have Owusu Koromoa.
Yeah,
Man,
you have
you have
Bilal, then Owusu Koromoa.
you have tough pronunciations for that Notre Dame linebacking core.
Are they
Get that-
going to be tough on the field, though? Will
Yeah,
tough pronunciations correlate?
But-
Oh, Caroline, the bad
I'm
jokes are
sorry.
killing me.
But really,
I
though,
have to.
this
It's all
Notre
I'm
Dame,
feeling this week.
this Notre Dame linebacking core, it's not that they're young guys, it's that they're inexperienced
Yes,
guys.
agree.
And you're going up
completely.
against the Georgia offensive line, and it's also the Notre Dame defensive tackles.
Yeah.
Myron Tagovailoa and Kurt Hinish, they're both young guys as well, inexperienced. So this Georgia offensive line, and to touch on David
David's
David's favorite fact, Georgia's offensive line averages 328 pounds. Average NFL offensive line, 314.
Which
We're
sounds
dealing
numbers
with
again.
big guys.
What was that? What was that?
328 and 314. We're
Yeah.
dealing with big guys here, and it's going to be a lot for the linebackers to keep up and plug the holes that they have to and keep up with the Georgia running backs. There's 5 rushers on this Georgia team over 100 yards this season.
Yeah.
Our leading rusher is Ian Book at 127.
Let's not talk about it. So, but with this game, who has more to lose? You have a number 3 Georgia. If they win out their schedule, they might win the college, or they will end up in the college football playoff. Let's make no mistake about it. If they lose to us, they could still win out and make the college football playoff. For us, if we lose this game, is our season over?
I think in terms of the college football playoff, if Notre Dame were to lose, you just take a look at it. As you said with Georgia, if they lose this game, they'll have their shot at Bama. If they beat Bama, they're in. Notre Dame now, if they lose to Georgia, it becomes a game of like rooting for teams to lose certain weeks. And I just don't see a path where Notre Dame gets in over Georgia or Alabama if we lose to Georgia.
Yeah, and this is where it comes back to the conference championship. You know, Georgia, if they drop this one to Notre Dame, has the chance to redeem themselves in that conference championship. If they win the SEC championship,
And it's Bama.
and
It's Bama.
and it's Bama.
Yeah.
Then I mean they're going to the college football playoff. There's no disputing that. So
Yeah.
I do think Notre Dame has more to lose in this game than Georgia does, 100%. Simply because the only way Notre Dame even has a chance to get into the playoff is with an undefeated regular season. Even if
Yeah.
that happens, I don't think it 100% guarantees. I think it's pretty likely that if Notre Dame goes undefeated in the regular season, Notre Dame would make it back into the
it's a
college football
guarantee.
playoff.
It's a
I don't think
guarantee.
it's a guarantee. We
It's
can get
a
into
guarantee.
This. I don't think it's a
Oh, we
guarantee.
don't have time
but,
to
yeah, this
go
would
into
take
that. That'll
forever.
take 4
But
hours.
I think, you know, if you look at Georgia, Georgia has the conference championship that really
Yeah.
can just be like that nail in the coffin. We deserve to be in the college football playoff that Notre Dame would not have if they drop this one to Georgia.
Yeah, and I think that if Notre Dame drops one game and then wins out last year, then we make the college football playoff. But after last year's disaster in the Cotton Bowl, I don't think we make that unless we're 12-0.
I do just want to say, even though I think it's unlikely Notre Dame makes the playoff with the loss this week, I don't think it's a guarantee.
Okay.
Or we still have strong games.
All right, well, just looking forward to this game. We're going to send it down to Charlie McFadden now, who has the 3 keys to this week's game.
Hi, I'm Charlie McFadden, and here are 3 keys to Notre Dame's matchup versus Georgia on Saturday night. 1. Force the pass. The Bulldogs enter the game as a top 10 rushing offense in college football, with the dominant backfield of DeAndre Swift, Zamir White, and Kenny McIntosh. If the Irish hope to succeed on defense, they'll need to force Jake Fromm to pass to the young, unexperienced Georgia receiving corps. 2. Establish the run. A popular critique of the Irish squad so far this year is that they have trouble running the ball successfully. The backfield has accumulated 387 yards, ranking 45th in all of college football as compared to Georgia, who ranks 8th. With the return of starting tight end Cole Kmet, the Irish have an opportunity to beat Georgia at their own game and open weaknesses on Georgia's defensive line. 3. Stay poised. Going to Sanford Stadium in Athens has been a struggle in recent years for opposing teams. The Bulldogs have not lost on their home turf since November of 2016, a loss that came to Georgia Tech. If the Irish want a shot at bucking the trend, they'll need to bring their very best when they travel down south. Now back to you.
Thank you so much, Chuck. A man after my own heart, as that was my segment last year. So I really
Hi, I'm Ellen
love
Geyer. Can you do it?
We're not going to talk about it. No.
Sake.
But we are going to introduce a new segment on this show, which is something that comes from The Observer, which is where I work in the basement of South Dining Hall. Super glamorous job, if anyone was wondering. But this segment is called Fact or Fiction. So the way this works is one of us has a hot take, and the other two say whether it's fact or fiction.
So how many total hot takes do we have?
3. It's a trap. It's always a trap, you guys, especially with these two. So I'm going to start with my one hot take, and that is DeAndre Swift rushes for 130 yards. Fact or fiction?
Go ahead. You can take this
Fact.
one. Fact.
Yes, he really has a chance now. He's established himself as that #1 guy for Georgia. They're going to need a good run game to beat Notre Dame because Notre Dame's linebackers are going to have that big test on their hands. I think that's what they're going to attack. They know that the secondary is going to be stronger than the linebacking core, so I think they kind of go after that. They stay on the ground and try to establish that. I do think he breaks 130.
I'm going to say fact as well. I don't think that Swift runs loose on this Notre Dame team, even though everything we've said would indicate that we believe he will.
That he probably will.
I think he goes for like 140, 145 maybe. He's going to have a good day.
Yeah.
But I don't think we're looking at a 200-yard performance. I really hope.
I say fact because he's averaging, I think, 98 yards per game so far, but he hasn't really gotten that many carries. So I think that he's going to be their go-to guy. He's going to get the ball a lot more. I disagree, Paul. I think he's going to break loose at least once.
You do?
But I don't know. I guess we'll find out.
Yeah,
So
I think it'll be the Tua syndrome where he won't play. Like, he hasn't been playing so late in the game that he hasn't really built up the numbers, which is why his average is lower than you would expect, maybe from the caliber of running back that he is.
Yeah. All
All
right.
right, so I'm going to go here. I'm going to say Notre Dame has a costly turnover. And whether that's in the first quarter where we're driving and Notre Dame's able to strip us or intercept Book, or if it's at the end of the game in perhaps a comeback effort, I think the question is, does Notre Dame have a costly turnover in this game?
I say fact. I think Notre Dame, God love them, but they're not that good under pressure with the poise, I think. I think Ian Book can get a little bit frazzled. So I say, I don't know if it's going to come in the first quarter. I don't know if it's going to come in the third quarter. But I think fact, at some point, we're going to have a costly turnover. And I do think it will ultimately cost us the game.
See, I completely see that, and I do think that it's a very reasonable thing, and part of me wants to just kind of go with that and say fact, but I'm going to go on the optimistic side this week, place my trust in Book and the rest of that offense, and say fiction. And I think Book has taken care of the ball so far this year. He's looked smarter. I think the big question mark is, like we've talked about, can he keep his composure? I'm going to hope that he can. I'm going to say fiction. I think Notre Dame, I don't think we're going to go without a turnover the whole game, but I don't think it's going to be in a situation where we can't recover from it and kind of make that next drive one that builds back on it. So I'm going to say fiction.
I'm going to say fact. I'm going to go with the early turnover.
The early turnover. All right,
Sense.
Caroline,
okay.
fact or fiction?
Mine is Chase Claypool breaks 100 receiving yards in this game. Fact or fiction?
Oh, gosh, Paul, you want to take this
I'm
one
going to go
first?
fact. I think he will. I think he just eclipses the 100-yard mark. We said earlier in the show that last week Ian Book and him seemed to be on the same page. They were clicking against New Mexico. I think Claypool has a big game for Notre Dame.
Yeah, I've been a pessimist this entire show, so I'm going to say fact. I think Ian Book's got a good arm. We're going to see him use it this week.
Well, I'm going to also go fact. So
I
I
like
this one.
us.
I do think the only way that Notre Dame beats Georgia is if those big players who have some experience build on that experience and really show up and do a great job establishing themselves early in the game. And I think Claypool needs to be one of those guys.
Yeah, we're going to need some explosive plays.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
and Claypool's the guy.
I think Claypool can have a couple of those explosive plays. We talked about a couple of those breakaway plays from Notre Dame
His yards
receivers.
after catch.
Yes, exactly. And that's where he has the chance to really distinguish himself in this game against Georgia.
Yeah. Okay, so that is fact or fiction. Now we're going to go into another new segment, which is inspired by my 2-0 status in my fantasy football league. The winner of which gets to eat first at Thanksgiving, because it's my family, so the stakes are extremely high, if anyone was wondering.
Hey, Geyer family, so if Ellen goes 3-0.
This is too much. Okay, anyway, so we're going to do a fantasy, it's not going to be a snake draft, it's just going to be a around-the-table, NFL type draft. But we're going to do our draft for for Notre Dame. And we're gonna do 3 rounds. And so, Paul, with the first pick of the 2019 Notre Dame fantasy football draft, who do you select?
I'm gonna do a cardinal sin here, and I'm gonna take a quarterback. I'm gonna go with Ian Book, and I do that because I think he might be our leading rusher this game.
Oh,
so you're getting the rushing points, and he's gonna have to throw.
All right,
well.
Caroline?
I sincerely hope that he's not the leading rusher in this game because I don't think we beat Georgia if he is. And I'm also going to go really unconventional without a running back just because I don't have much faith in the run game. If Jafar was not hurt, I would have taken Jafar here. But
I would have taken Javon.
Okay, well, whatever. Someone would have
Anyway.
taken Javon if you would still take an Ian Book. I'm going to go Chase Claypool. We talked about his ability to really distinguish himself as that #1 receiver, be the new kind of Miles Boykin, Book's favorite target. I take Chase Claypool first.
All right, clearly these guys have the wrong strategy. I'm taking a running back with the first pick, as everyone does logically in fantasy
We
football.
said it was unconventional.
Tony Jones Jr., my first pick, easy money. You guys made a mistake.
I'm sorry, he was the what number receiver against New Mexico? Fifth? Was
Fifth.
that what you said? The fifth leading receiver.
All right, moving on.
Not the
Second
third
round
leading
to start
receiver.
the second round. Paul, who's your second pick?
Here's between Cole Kmet and Javon McKinley for me, and I'm going to go with McKinley. I think that this is another game for him where he steps up and is able to sort of fill that void of Miles
And
Boykin.
for the record, it took Paul about, I don't know, 10 minutes to develop that pick earlier when we were talking about our picks before the show. So take his poise under pressure with a grain of salt.
Yeah, also, if I can give any advice to people who know Paul, play fantasy with him because he's probably going to auto-draft his entire he can't pick fast enough.
Caroline,
He takes too long.
second pick on your team.
So I'm going to go with the running back this time, like we said. Get that running back on the roster. The question is who? Because Notre Dame doesn't have a ton of guys who we expect to be really explosive. So I'm going to place some faith in a freshman who may not even see that many snaps against Georgia. But Kyron Williams really impressed me against New Mexico. Granted, he played at the end of the game, so that's not against a great defense, and it was kind of a little bit garbage time after Notre Dame had established a pretty dominant lead. But Notre Dame is going to need guys to step up who we don't expect, and I want him to be one of those guys. So I'm going to go Kyron Williams, my second pick.
Okay, third pick, I'm going Cole Kmet. He's coming back this week. Theoretically, I think he's going to be a really good option.
No, he's big.
He's one of those senior leadership guys. I think the tight end option plays have been really successful for Ian Book in the past. I think he's going to use them a lot this season, especially if things don't go as planned with Claypool. And Chris Fink is just kind of small, so I think the tight end's going to be a good option for him. So I'm taking Cole Kmet.
Last round here?
Last round.
Avery Davis. No, I would take Avery Davis.
Does Paul even know how fantasy works?
I love Avery Davis, but I'm going with Chris. I'm going with Chris Fink.
Okay.
I'm going with Chris Fink.
Okay, very fair. I'm going to go with Braden Lenzy. Another kind of same mentality as Kyron Williams. Notre Dame needs guys to step up. This one a receiver. He's so fast. He was originally going to run track here at Notre Dame and then decided to drop that and focus solely on football. But he has really established himself as a guy that can just get open.
Yeah.
And if Book has that guy downfield, that's going to be big. That's something Notre Dame is going to need to use if they can create that separation against Georgia. Braden Lenzy.
Former Oregon guy, so you know that there's speed there.
Speed.
There's always speed. I'm going to say Tommy Tremble with my third and final pick, and that just finishes off my winning team. So I think if we get these guys, they probably watch this show. I would guess. It's probably part of their game watch. I would think part of their.
That's how they prepare. Yeah.
So if you guys are watching,
watch Shamrock Sports.
Yeah, if you guys are watching, we're going to need a 3-on-3 tournament of these teams.
A 3-on-3
and
tournament?
all right, it just doesn't end. Anyway, we're gonna finish this up with the last couple of minutes with our predictions. So, Caroline, take it away. What's your prediction final score of this week's game?
So I mentioned earlier, I think Notre Dame keeps it close in the first half. I do think we see a good 2 quarters of play. I think Georgia comes out of the half really strong, really dominant. I think they're going to win this one 31-17.
Now, I'm not one for blind optimism, and you can see here that I picked Georgia in this game. But the more I've thought about it, what kind of a Notre Dame analyst, Notre Dame television personality would I be if I were going to pick Georgia in this game?
I just did that.
So
what are you trying to say, Paul?
what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick Notre Dame to cover the spread. 30-17 dogs.
What? Paul, the way you just established that made it sound like Notre Dame's running away with this game by 3 touchdowns.
Oh, I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. We can have a little fun, but I'm not crazy here.
That remains. We might need to watch this show back and really determine whether or not.
Oh, wait till you see my fantasy
You're
team.
crazy if you think Notre Dame cannot go undefeated and make it to the college football playoff.
Okay.
But that's a different time.
We'll do that next.
All right, I think Notre Dame's coming in just under the 14.5-point spread, but Georgia's still going to run away with this one. It's just too hard when you're up against that crowd in Athens. If Notre Dame can't win in South Bend, I don't think they can win at Georgia. So I'm taking the dogs on this one, 38-24.
But if Notre Dame does win, we all, as Notre Dame fans, will remember the 21st night of September. Had to do it, sorry.
And with that terrible joke, we will end that show just the way we started it. So from Ellen Geyer alongside Paul Farrington and Caroline Pineda, this has been Shamrock Sports. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, go Irish.
All night, babe, make me wanna say, la 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 la.